Okay, let's have a look for some newspaper articles, see what's around on this particular topic, which I know you all like, because it gets a lot of views anyway. So the top one, let's have a look. Is the system letting down people who were harmed by COVID vaccines? And this is from the BBC. Let's see what it says. Oh, that's strange, but it's only 6 hours old and it's already unavailable. How odd. Let's have a look for it on archive.is. And, oh yes, it's still here. Thank God. We can still read it. We aren't going to be denied the chance to read what the BBC can tell us about COVID vaccines. So this is from the BBC and it's a story by Fergus Walsh, medical editor. And it was released 5 hours ago, even though if you try and find it online, it's already disappeared. It's gone down the memory hole. If anybody's read 1984, you'll all know about the memory hole. This one seems to have gone down the memory hole, but thanks to archive.is, we can still read it. So there is nothing in life that is free of risk. Very true. That includes vaccines. Absolutely. But the evidence is compelling that the benefits of getting immunised with those vaccines recommended in the UK far outweigh the possibility of serious side effects. Phew, I'm sure a lot of you can relax now that you've read that. The level of benefit from COVID vaccines is well documented, and the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine is credited with saving more hypothetical lives in the first year of its use than any other vaccine. They say that it saved 6.3 million hypothetical people globally compared to 5.9 million hypothetical people for the Pfizer and BioNTech's jab. However, we do need to discuss not just the huge positives that COVID vaccines hypothetically brought, but also the small minority left injured or bereaved. Bereaved means that you have lost someone in your family. So they're talking about families who lost a person, families where somebody died due to the AstraZeneca vaccine. They are families who were left bereaved by the AstraZeneca vaccine. The vaccine took someone from their family away. Around 50 families affected by rare blood clots. You remember the blood clots? You remember me talking about blood clots in March 2021? I made a video which was banned, which specifically mentioned blood clots, and YouTube banned it because of medical misinformation. By rare blood clots have begun a group legal action for compensation under the Consumer Protection Act, arguing that the vaccine was not as safe as the public were entitled to expect. This includes people who have been left with severe physical injuries, those who are unable to work, and bereaved families who have lost a loved one due to vaccine damage. They are a tiny fraction of all those vaccinated, but that is no comfort to the families affected, who feel like they have been airbrushed out of the pandemic and that their pleas for support have been ignored. Those families include Jane and Ian Wrigley from Buckinghamshire. Jane, 62, used to run, ski and climb mountains. Now she can barely walk due to extreme weakness down her left-hand side. 2 weeks after receiving the AstraZeneca vaccine in March 2021, Jane was admitted to hospital. She suffered blood clots in her brain and required emergency surgery to remove part of her skull. Jane's medical records clearly state that she suffered these blood clots as a direct effect of the vaccine. Her husband, Ian, is now her full-time carer. Jane told me, before I had the vaccine, I was a very independent, active woman doing half marathons and enjoying my life, but I've now lost every bit of independence. Her case, and those of others affected by blood clots, raises serious questions about whether the system is letting down those who have suffered serious harm as a result of taking COVID vaccines. And of course, it also raises the question whether you would like to take another one. Almost 25 million adults in the UK received a first dose of Oxford's AstraZeneca vaccine in 2021, and nearly all of them had a second. I wonder why some of them chose not to have a second. It is estimated that the COVID vaccine programme prevented over 250,000 hypothetical hospital admissions and over 120,000 hypothetical deaths in the UK until September 2021. The side effects of vaccination are usually mild and short-lived. such as a sore arm, fever and fatigue. So I hope that makes you all feel much better. However, in the very rare event that something goes seriously wrong, we have a right to expect that we will be supported. This is a kind of social contract between individual and state. I don't know if you would like to enter into such a contract. I'm not sure that I would. That's where the Vaccine Damage Payment Scheme comes in. The Vaccine Damage Payment Scheme was established in 1979 in the aftermath of a scare over the safety of the whooping cough vaccine in use at the time. Okay, so this is not the first vaccine that has had certain scares about safety. The government-backed scheme offers a one-off financial payment. Yeah, a one-off payment means a payment given only once. You're not allowed any more. In the event that, on the balance of probability, a vaccine has caused at least 60% disablement. Now, we saw that even if you can't blink or breathe, that's not necessarily 60% disabled. And so do be warned that 60% disabled is very disabled. Between the late 1970s and 2020, there were just below 6,500 claims under the scheme for all vaccines, and there were 944 awards. So 1,000 out of 6,500 got some kind of compensation. Not many. The Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine is credited with saving millions of lives, but it was also responsible, in rare cases, for serious side effects. Blood clots on the brain sounds pretty serious, which could be fatal. Fatal sounds serious. This is the story of those fighting for compensation. But something dramatic has happened since the pandemic. There have been more than double the number of claims under the vaccine damage payment system for COVID jabs than during the previous 4 decades for all other vaccines combined. Okay, so double for the COVID jabs, all other vaccines, half the number of claims for damage, for payment, for compensation. Since the pandemic, there have been almost 16,000 claims against COVID vaccines. Yeah, so 6,500 for all other vaccines, 16,000 for the COVID vaccines, and only 180 awards. So 180 people out of 16,000 have received compensation so far. Just over half of all claimants have yet to find out if they have been successful. So that means that 8,000 or 8,000 minus 180 people already know that they will not be getting anything. So what is happening? Of the awards, all but a handful are for damage done by the AstraZeneca COVID vaccine, which is no longer used. I wonder why they stopped using it. There is a long list of different health conditions that qualify for a payment, but the AstraZeneca jab had one specific rare side effect not seen in the mRNA vaccines produced by Pfizer and Moderna, which are now the mainstay of all COVID booster campaigns. The side effect is a type of blood clot, often in the brain, combined with low platelet levels, almost always within a few weeks of receiving the first dose. Now, I don't know how they can be sure about that. I mean, I imagine that it's possible 10 years after the first dose, 20 years after the first dose. And the fact that it says almost always and not always makes me think that it is possible. Maybe 10 years after, maybe 20 years after, who knows? I suppose they haven't had time yet to fully investigate whether it is safe or not and what the long-term effects are. And so we will find out in 10, 20 years whether there are long-term effects as well. This can cause damage in the brain and to multiple other organs. Platelets are cells that help your blood clot, and it was so unusual to see blood clots combined with low platelet levels that experts coined a new medical term, vaccine-induced thrombosis with thrombocytopenia. These were so unusual that the signal was not seen in the clinical trials of the vaccine involving more than 23,000 participants, but only once the jab had started being rolled out across Europe and given to millions. So it was only seen once the jab had started being rolled out across Europe. I find that quite strange because I'm sure that I remember seeing a woman who was in the clinical trials for the AstraZeneca jab, and I swear that she developed blood clots, but perhaps my memory is mistaken. It's possible. In mid-March 2021, a dozen European countries briefly suspended use of the AstraZeneca jab while the clots link was investigated. So this is why I knew in March 2021 about the blood clots, because at least 18 countries knew about the blood clots and they stopped their AstraZeneca jab, because of the blood clots. And so there you go. It was well known in March 2021. This side effect was well known. And that's why it was banned in so many countries. Then in April that year, the UK restricted the vaccine to the over 30s and a month later to the over 40s, because it became clear that young people were at higher risk from the clots. There you go. So young people had a much greater risk than older people. And so when we're talking about benefits outweighing the risks, let's not forget that. Several other European countries, when they resumed using AstraZeneca vaccine, set the age limit range much higher. France to those over 55, Germany, Italy and the Irish Republic to the over 60s, Denmark halted its use altogether. In early April 2021, safety regulators in the UK and Europe had concluded that blood clots combined with low platelets should be listed as a rare side effect. Good. The rare syndrome was also reported among recipients of the Johnson & Johnson Janssen COVID jab, which uses the same type of vaccine technology in the United States. Sarah Moore, a solicitor with the law firm Lee Day, says the families she represents have been driven to sue AstraZeneca because of the inadequacies of the vaccine damage payment scheme. The scheme offers too little, too late to too few people, she says. She describes the £120,000 payment as woefully inadequate, pointing out that the figure has not increased since 2007. Had the sum kept pace with inflation, and we all know how high that is at the moment, it would now stand at £197,000. Yeah, I think it would actually be higher than that if we actually measured real inflation and not clown inflation as we do. Miss Moore says some of her clients need 24-hour care, cannot wash or dress themselves, have been left with severe physical or cognitive deficits and will never work again. The case of Jane and Ian Wrigley also illustrates another criticism of the vaccine damage payment scheme: delay. The couple waited over 2 years for a payment under the scheme, and we saw that John Cross waited years and years, and in the end, sadly, he decided to end it all. He was so tired of waiting for any kind of compensation. And so delay is certainly a problem. It's such a problem that it has even led to suicide. Despite the clear-cut nature of the case, assessments under the vaccine damage payment scheme are done on paper and do not involve physical examination. So how do they find out that you're 60% disabled if they don't even physically examine you? Last year, the government announced that it had modernised the operations of the vaccine damage payment scheme to allow cases to be processed more quickly and increase the number of staff dealing with claims from 4 to 80. But a huge backlog of claims has built up, so they've still got people waiting. Peter Schultz, 49, is another member of the group Action Against AstraZeneca. He too suffered blood clots after receiving the AstraZeneca vaccine in April 2021. So that was after everybody knew, including me, about the blood clots. He didn't know, though. Nobody told him. And he now needs 24-hour care because nobody told him. His submission to the vaccine damage payment scheme was completed in July 2022, yet he is still awaiting a decision, despite blood clots being clearly mentioned in his medical records. Finally, there is the 60% disablement threshold for successful claims, which has ruled out hundreds of people, including those who can't blink or breathe, who are officially recognised as having been damaged by COVID vaccines, like John Cross, who I feel very sorry for. Miss Moore says she had a female client who is now blind in one eye, with one other physical and psychological injuries. Sorry about the bad English. With one other physical injury and maybe another psychological injury, but she was told she didn't reach the 60% threshold. So you lose an eye, that's not 60% disabled. I suppose that's 50% disabled, something like that. I don't know how they work it out. She says under normal civil claim rules, blindness in one eye could lead to compensation of more than $200,000. It was absolutely heartbreaking, she added, for people to be told that the vaccine had caused their injuries, yet be informed they are not disabled enough to qualify for a payment. Whew, there's a lot in this one, isn't there? There's a lot more to go through. Let's perhaps finish it off. We'll see if we can. During the pandemic, the government granted vaccine manufacturers legal indemnity. That means they don't have to pay any compensation if their product causes damage. The taxpayer pays, they don't pay. And that's who is paying the vaccine damage payment scheme. It's you and me that pay. It's not Pfizer, it's not Moderna, it's not AstraZeneca. This did not prevent people from making a claim for compensation against pharmaceutical firms, but determine who would pay in the event of a successful action, namely you and me. Then, Health Secretary Matt Hancock told the Commons, "We are providing indemnities in the very unexpected event of any adverse reactions that could not have been foreseen through the robust checks and procedures that have been put in place." Miss Moore says she has not seen a copy of this legal undertaking, but believes it means that the government will pick up AstraZeneca's legal costs, the taxpayer she means, not the government, and would be responsible for paying compensation in the event of a successful claim. AstraZeneca made no profit from its COVID vaccine, Vaxzevria, but its total revenue in 2023 was $45.8 billion, £35.1 billion, with profits of $5.9 billion. In May, AstraZeneca withdrew Vaxzevria, citing a surplus of available updated vaccines. Well, there we go. I heard that it was not commercially viable, so they weren't making enough money from it. But I've also heard about the blood clots, so maybe that had some kind of influence on the decision to withdraw the vaccine. I'm not sure. The UK government did not buy any doses for its booster programmes, and all COVID vaccines used in the UK for this autumn's booster campaign are either Pfizer or Moderna, both of which use mRNA technology. So you can all relax, you can all rest. Professor Adam Finn is one of the UK's leading experts on vaccines, and throughout the pandemic was a member of the JCVI, the body which advises the government on immunisation. He was involved in key decisions on recommending the order in which the public received COVID vaccines and the age restrictions put on the AstraZeneca jab when the Clots risks emerged. Professor Finn, who is a professor of paediatrics at the University of Bristol, says COVID vaccines were a massive success. Yeah, try telling that to the woman who lost one eye. And really saved a lot of people's lives. Notice the really, yeah, just in case you are not sure, they really did save a lot of hypothetical lives. He is not involved in the legal action and believes the decisions taken in the UK around the vaccine's use were correct. Well, considering he was a decision maker, he was involved in key decisions, you might say that he has a conflict of interest here. He's hardly going to criticise himself, his own decisions. But he says that the vaccine damage payment scheme is clearly not working as it should, and that payments should be index linked so that they reflect changes in the cost of living. He also criticises the very arbitrary 60% threshold for payouts. Well, thanks, Professor Finn. He adds that it's necessary to take a really good look at compensation for all current and future vaccines. I point out to Professor Finn that there was a danger in a report like this that it could undermine confidence in vaccines. He rejects this. The only way to retain trust is to be honest. But he does think the inadequacies of the VDPS risk undermining that public confidence in vaccines. While only a small proportion of people have been affected, he says, they've been very seriously harmed, and that is going to attract public attention. It's going to be reported, and people are going to reflect on that, and people will want to see those people treated fairly. In a statement, AstraZeneca said, "We cannot comment on ongoing litigation, as sympathy goes out to anyone who has lost loved ones or reported health problems. Patient safety is our highest priority." Well, please do tell us next time if you find out about blood clots, and tell us immediately. Don't wait 3 years. The statement added that AstraZeneca's vaccine has continuously been shown to have an acceptable safety profile, and regulators around the world consistently state that the benefits of vaccination outweigh the risks of extremely rare potential side effects. Well, they did stop this vaccine. They did ban it from the young, and so I assume that at least for the young, the benefits did not outweigh the risks. The Health Secretary Wes Streeting recently met with people who have been injured or bereaved as a result of vaccine damage. In a statement, the Department of Health and Social Care said the meeting was to listen to their concerns, and said the government will look closely at these as we continue to learn and apply the lessons of the pandemic. The statement added, "Our deepest sympathies are with those who have suffered harm." The DHSC said the administrator of the VDPS had made operational changes to the scheme in an effort to reduce the time claimants wait for an outcome. The workings of the VDPS will be considered in the next module of the COVID inquiry, which will begin taking evidence in January 2025. Miss Moore, who expects to give evidence to the inquiry, says her clients are not anti-vax, whatever the hell that means. I assume it means that they're not against vaccines, but having been injured by them, I doubt that they're very much for them either. She says we are acting for people who stood up and got vaccinated. By definition, they are all pro-vaccination. Well, they were. Are they still now?